Have you ever felt your inner peace slowly fade without a clear reason? Have you noticed small habits, seemingly harmless, quietly unsettling your heart over time? And have you wondered how something so small could gently disturb your closeness with God? Saint Thérèse of Lisieux understood this mystery deeply. She taught that the soul rarely loses peace through great falls alone. More often, peace is wounded little by little, through small faults that go unnoticed, excused, or repeated without attention. These faults do not shout, they whisper. They settle quietly into daily life and slowly dull the soul's sensitivity to grace. Hook. Peace does not disappear suddenly. It is slowly wounded by small faults the heart refuses to notice. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, subscribe if you wish to walk this little way and learn how to protect the quiet peace God desires for your soul. Saint Thérèse believed that peace is one of God's most delicate gifts. It is easily disturbed, not because it is weak, but because it is tender. Like a thin flame in still air, it must be guarded, not with fear, but with love and attentiveness. Small faults, when ignored, act like gentle draughts that slowly weaken this flame. She wrote, "Fidelity in little things leads to great peace." Notice her emphasis, little things. Thérèse did not fear great struggles as much as she feared becoming careless in small matters. Why? Because the soul that grows accustomed to small faults slowly loses its interior clarity. These faults often appear innocent: a slight impatience, a quiet complaint, a hidden resentment, a habit of distraction, a soft resistance to God's invitations. None of these seem serious. None appear dramatic. And yet Thérèse warned that when the soul stops paying attention to these small movements, peace begins to weaken, not because God withdraws, but because the heart becomes less receptive. Imagine a calm pond at dawn. Its surface is smooth, reflecting the sky perfectly. A single pebble does little, but pebble after pebble, ripple after ripple, the reflection blurs. The water is still there, but clarity is lost. This is what small faults do to the soul. Thérèse lived in constant attentiveness to her interior life, not with anxiety, but with gentleness. She would notice when her heart grew impatient or distracted and immediately turn it into an act of love. "Jesus, I offer you this small struggle." In doing so, she protected her peace. Peace for Thérèse was not the absence of effort. It was the fruit of alignment, when the heart remains soft, humble, and responsive to grace. The danger arises when small faults are excused repeatedly. "It's nothing. It doesn't matter. I'll fix it later. This is just how I am." Over time, these phrases create spiritual numbness. The soul no longer feels the gentle invitations of God. Prayer becomes less tender. Love becomes less spontaneous. Peace becomes fragile. Thérèse teaches us that God does not demand perfection, but he desires attention. Attention to the movements of the heart. Attention to love. Attention to small things. In this journey, we will explore how small faults quietly wound peace, why the soul becomes insensitive to them, and how the little way gently restores interior harmony through humility, simplicity, and love. For now, pause and ask yourself softly, what small fault have I stopped noticing? Where has my peace quietly thinned? Awareness is the beginning of healing. To understand how small faults wound the soul's peace, Saint Thérèse of Lisieux invites us to look not at the fault itself, but at the interior habit that allows it to remain. Peace is not lost because a soul stumbles. Peace is lost when a soul becomes careless toward what disturbs love. Thérèse insisted that God is never harsh with weakness. What quietly wounds peace is not falling, but growing comfortable with falling, especially in small, repeated ways. When the soul stops responding gently to its own imperfections, it slowly loses its sensitivity to grace. She wrote, "Little negligences, when they are not corrected, lead the soul to discouragement." Notice her precision. The danger is not the negligence alone, but what follows it: discouragement, dullness, distance. Small faults often begin as reactions rather than choices: a tone of impatience when tired, a sharp thought left unchallenged, a moment of distraction accepted without return. A quiet refusal to love when love feels inconvenient. Each moment seems insignificant, but peace is not wounded by sighs. It is wounded by repetition without love. Imagine a delicate fabric. A single thread pulled does not ruin it. But if that same thread is tugged again and again, the fabric weakens. Eventually it tears, not dramatically, but gradually. The soul's peace is like that fabric. Thérèse understood that peace lives where the heart remains vigilant, not anxious, but attentive. Vigilance for her was not tension. It was love paying attention. She watched her heart gently like a gardener watching over fragile flowers, removing small weeds before they could take root. She believed that small faults become dangerous only when they are ignored. When ignored, they grow familiar. When familiar, they become habits. And when they become habits, the soul no longer notices the loss of peace, only its absence. This is why Thérèse practiced immediate, loving correction. When she noticed impatience, she did not scold herself. She smiled inwardly and turned to God. Jesus, here is my weakness. I offer it to you. Peace returned, not because the fault disappeared instantly, but because love was restored. Small faults wound peace when the heart stops converting them into acts of love. Another danger Thérèse identified was interior justification. The soul begins to explain its faults instead of offering them. I'm tired. They deserved it. This is understandable. It's not serious. While these explanations may be true, they quietly close the heart to transformation. Peace suffers not because the soul is honest, but because it no longer listens. Thérèse teaches that peace flourishes where humility lives. Humility does not deny faults. It acknowledges them gently and places them in God's hands. This keeps the heart soft, receptive, and aligned with grace. So ask yourself tenderly, have I grown used to certain small faults? Have I stopped offering them to God? Have I allowed explanation to replace surrender? Peace is restored not by harsh discipline, but by loving attention. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux taught that one of the first signs the soul's peace has been quietly wounded by small faults is found in prayer, not in its absence, but in its tone. Prayer does not disappear suddenly. It slowly loses its warmth. Small faults rarely make a soul stop praying. They make prayer feel heavier, less tender, more mechanical. Thérèse understood this with great delicacy. She believed that prayer is like a living flame. It burns brightly when the heart is attentive, humble, and loving. But when small faults accumulate without being offered to God, the flame is not extinguished. It is slowly deprived of air. She once wrote, "When the heart is distracted by small infidelities, prayer becomes tiring instead of restful." This is a profound insight. Prayer becomes effort, not because God withdraws, but because the heart is no longer fully aligned with love. Imagine a quiet chapel, the same silence, the same candlelight, the same words of prayer, and yet something feels different. The soul kneels, but the heart is restless. Thoughts wander more easily. The desire to remain in God's presence weakens. Nothing dramatic has happened, and yet peace feels thinner. This is often the fruit of small repeated faults left unattended, a little impatience carried into prayer, a quiet resentment not released, a habit of distraction tolerated, a subtle resistance to God's gentle invitations. None of these break prayer, but together they drain its sweetness. Thérèse believed that prayer is not sustained by discipline alone, but by love. When love is wounded, even slightly, prayer loses its ease. It becomes something we do rather than something we enter. She experienced moments of dryness herself, but she distinguished between dryness sent by God and dryness caused by interior negligence. Dryness from God humbles and purifies. Dryness from small faults weighs and unsettles. The difference is subtle, but real. When prayer feels heavy, Thérèse did not push harder. She paused. She turned inward. She asked gently, "Jesus, where has my love grown less attentive?" And often the answer was small, very small. A moment where she had resisted smiling, a thought where she had judged silently, a reaction where she had chosen comfort over love. She would then offer that moment immediately, not with guilt, but with trust, and peace would begin to return. Small faults wound prayer, because prayer is born from relationship, and relationships suffer when small attentions disappear. Not through betrayal, but through neglect. Think of two people who love each other. If small kindnesses fade, if listening becomes careless, if patience thins, the relationship does not end, but it cools. The same happens between the soul and God. Thérèse teaches that the soul must guard prayer by guarding love in small things. The quality of prayer reflects the quality of daily attentiveness. When the heart lives carelessly, prayer reflects that carelessness. When the heart lives gently, prayer becomes gentle again. So ask yourself quietly, has my prayer lost its tenderness? Have I grown used to small interior faults? Have I stopped offering them lovingly to God? The answer is not discouragement. It is invitation. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux teaches that when small faults are left unattended, they do not remain confined to prayer alone. They begin to spread quietly into daily life, touching the soul's interior peace in ordinary moments, conversations, work, silence, waiting. Peace is not only something we feel when we pray, it is something we carry throughout the day. And small faults slowly loosen that inner harmony. These faults do not shout, they do not scandalize, they simply displace peace. Thérèse observed that a soul wounded by small faults becomes more easily unsettled. Little things disturb it more than they should. A change of plans irritates. A delay frustrates. A misunderstanding lingers longer in the heart. None of these reactions seem serious, yet together they reveal a soul whose interior balance has shifted. Why does this happen? Because peace is the fruit of a heart aligned with love. When love becomes less attentive, peace becomes less stable. Imagine a day lived with small resistances. You wake slightly impatient. You rush through a task without offering it. You respond briefly instead of kindly. You ignore a gentle nudge to pause or pray. Each moment is small, but the soul slowly tightens. By the end of the day, you feel restless, tired, unsettled, without knowing why. This is how peace is wounded, not by catastrophe, but by accumulation. Saint Thérèse believed that peace lives where the heart remains simple and surrendered. When the soul tries to manage itself, correct itself, justify itself, or protect itself too much, peace withdraws quietly. Not as punishment, but as a signal. She wrote, "When I lose peace, I know I have relied on myself. Small faults often pull the soul back into self-reliance. I'll handle this irritation alone. I don't need to turn this to God. It's not important." But for Thérèse, nothing that touches the heart is unimportant. Peace depends on constant, gentle turning toward God, especially in small things. Consider a simple image Thérèse would have loved. A child walking while holding a parent's hand. As long as the hand remains held, the child walks calmly. But the moment the child pulls away, even slightly, uncertainty enters. The path feels less secure. The steps become cautious. Small faults are those moments when the soul loosens its grip on God's hand. And the result is not dramatic sin, but interior unease. Thérèse teaches that peace is restored not by self-correction, but by return. The soul does not need to analyze itself endlessly. It needs to return again and again to God with humility and love. When she noticed her peace fading, she did not accuse herself. She simply became smaller. She offered a smile. She made a quiet act of trust. She whispered, "Jesus, I am little. Take care of everything." Peace returned because love returned. So if your days feel restless, if your heart feels easily disturbed, if small things unsettle you more than before, do not be discouraged. This is not failure. It is awareness. And awareness is grace. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux never believed that the wounds small faults create in the soul's peace should be healed with harshness. She rejected spiritual severity. She rejected interior violence. She rejected the idea that God desires tension, fear, or constant self-correction. Instead, she taught that peace is restored through gentle fidelity, a faithful return to love in the smallest moments. For Thérèse, healing begins the moment the soul stops fighting itself and begins offering itself. Small faults wound peace when the heart becomes rigid. Peace returns when the heart becomes soft again. She wrote, "When I fall, I do not stop. I rise immediately and return to Jesus with confidence." This confidence is the medicine. Many souls make this mistake. They notice a small fault and respond with frustration, self-criticism, or discouragement. But Thérèse teaches that such reactions deepen the wound. They replace love with pressure, they replace trust with effort, and peace cannot live where the heart is tense. Imagine a small child who spills something while trying to help. If the parent reacts with irritation, the child withdraws. But if the parent smiles and helps clean, the child relaxes and learns. Thérèse believed God always reacts like the second parent. Thus, the healing of peace begins with gentle acknowledgement. I was impatient. I resisted love. I became distracted. No drama, no condemnation, just truth, offered softly. Then comes the second movement. Small acts of repair. Thérèse taught that peace is not restored by dwelling on the fault, but by doing the opposite act with love. If impatience wounded peace, a small act of patience heals it. If distraction weakened prayer, a brief moment of recollection restores it. If silence toward love caused the wound, a gentle word becomes the balm. She called these acts flowers offered to Jesus. Small, simple, sincere. Picture Thérèse folding laundry, aware she responded coldly earlier in the day. Instead of replaying the fault in her mind, she chooses a quiet smile for the next sister she meets. Peace returns, not because the past changed, but because love resumed. This is a key truth of the little way. Peace follows love. When love returns, peace follows naturally. Another essential element is trusting God's tenderness more than your own vigilance. Thérèse warned that excessive attention to faults can itself disturb peace. She insisted that God is far more concerned with love than with precision. The soul must watch gently, not obsessively. She wrote, I prefer to fall trusting in God than to walk anxiously relying on myself. This sentence holds the heart of her teaching. So if you notice small faults in your life, do not fear them. Let them become invitations to gentleness, humility, and renewed love. Peace is not fragile when the heart remains confident in God's mercy. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux made a careful and compassionate distinction that many souls overlook. There is a difference between a tender conscience and an agitated conscience. Small faults wound the soul's peace, not only when they are ignored, but also when they are magnified by unnecessary interior tension. Peace suffers both from carelessness and from excessive self-scrutiny. Thérèse understood this balance intuitively. She knew that a soul truly attentive to love does not live in constant self-accusation. Instead, it lives in quiet awareness, ready to respond but not imprisoned by fear. She wrote, I do not want to be discouraged by my imperfections. This sentence reveals her wisdom. Discouragement is not humility. It is a subtle form of self-focus that turns the soul inward, rather than toward God. When peace has already been wounded by small faults, the soul can become overly sensitive. Every imperfection feels heavy. Every distraction feels serious. Every weakness feels like failure. The heart becomes tense, watchful, uneasy, not because it loves God more, but because it fears losing peace again. This is not the little way. An agitated conscience asks constantly, was that wrong? Did I fail again? Did I offend God? Am I doing enough? These questions do not arise from love, but from anxiety. A tender conscience, on the other hand, asks, how can I love better now? Where can I offer myself again? Where is God inviting me to be smaller? Thérèse taught that God does not desire a soul that watches itself nervously. He desires a soul that watches him with trust. When attention shifts too much toward personal faults, peace quietly slips away. Not because the soul is sinful, but because it is no longer resting in God. Imagine a child learning to walk. If the child watches every step with fear, she stumbles. But if she keeps her eyes on her parent's face, she walks freely. Thérèse believed the spiritual life works the same way. Small faults should lead the soul forward, not inward. When she noticed imperfections, Thérèse responded simply, yes, I am little, and that is exactly why I trust you. No analysis, no spiraling thoughts, just trust. This is why she warned against interior agitation. She saw that excessive tension wounds peace as much as negligence. Both remove the soul from simplicity. Both replace love with control. If you find yourself unsettled by constant self-examination, Thérèse would gently invite you to rest, to look away from yourself, to place your gaze back on God's tenderness. Peace grows where trust grows. The soul must be attentive, yes, but gently attentive, like a child listening for a familiar voice, not a judge waiting for a verdict. When small faults are noticed, they should be handed to God immediately and then released. Peace returns not because faults disappear, but because trust remains intact. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux teaches that the soul regains lasting peace, not by eliminating every small fault, but by learning to live lightly with its imperfections. Peace becomes stable when the heart stops clinging to itself, to its image, its progress, its consistency, and rests instead in God's tenderness. This is one of Thérèse's most liberating teachings. She wrote, "I must bear with myself as I am." These words are not an excuse for negligence. They are an act of humility. Thérèse knew that the soul that demands perfection from itself quickly loses peace. The soul that accepts its littleness with trust becomes free. Small faults wound peace when they awaken self-absorption. Why am I like this? Why can't I improve? Why do I fail so often? These questions turn the soul inward, and when the soul lives inwardly focused, peace cannot breathe. Thérèse chose another path. She allowed herself to be small. She allowed herself to be weak, and in doing so she remained light. Lightness for her was not superficial joy, it was spiritual freedom. Imagine a small bird resting on a branch. It does not calculate the strength of the branch. It simply rests, trusting it will hold. Thérèse believed the soul should rest like that in God, without weighing every imperfection. When the heart becomes heavy with self-concern, peace fades. When the heart becomes light with trust, peace returns. Living lightly means refusing to dramatize small faults. It means acknowledging them, offering them, and then moving on with love. Thérèse did not linger on her imperfections. She moved forward immediately, choosing joy as an act of faith. She wrote, "Joy is not found in things, but in the interior disposition of the soul." Peace and joy are closely linked. A soul weighed down by self-focus cannot remain peaceful for long. Living lightly also means embracing simplicity. Thérèse believed that simplicity keeps peace intact. When the soul complicates its spiritual life through excessive rules, constant analysis, or rigid expectations, peace slowly drains away. But when the soul chooses simplicity, peace finds a place to rest. Consider a simple day lived lightly. You notice impatience. You smile inwardly and offer it. You feel distracted. You gently return to God. You fail to love perfectly. You choose to love again. No drama, no discouragement, no tension. This is the little way in practice. Thérèse teaches that peace is not something you hold tightly. It is something you allow. The more you try to control it, the more it slips away. The more you trust God to give it, the more it remains. Small faults lose their power to wound peace when the heart stays little, joyful and free. They become reminders of dependence rather than sources of disturbance. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux teaches that when the soul learns to live lightly, peace does not merely return, it matures. It becomes deeper, quieter, and less dependent on emotions or circumstances. This mature peace is not fragile, it is rooted, and it grows slowly through fidelity in small things. Thérèse understood that peace is not preserved by constant emotional calm, but by interior alignment. A soul may feel tired, distracted, or weak, and still remain at peace, if it continues to choose love in simplicity. Peace matures when the heart stops reacting dramatically to its imperfections and starts resting confidently in God's mercy. She wrote, "My peace does not depend on my feelings, but on my confidence." This is a decisive shift. The soul no longer asks, "Do I feel peaceful?" but rather, "Am I trusting?" Mature peace remains even when small faults appear, because those faults no longer define the soul's relationship with God. They no longer threaten belonging. They no longer cause interior panic. Instead, they quietly reinforce dependence. Imagine a tree growing in shallow soil. A small wind disturbs it. Its leaves shake easily. But a tree whose roots have grown deep remains steady even when winds pass through. Thérèse believed peace grows like roots, slowly, invisibly through repeated acts of trust. Each time the soul responds to a small fault with humility instead of discouragement, a root grows deeper. Each time the soul returns to God without fear, peace strengthens. Each time the soul chooses love again, stability forms. This is why Thérèse emphasized perseverance in little acts, not to achieve perfection, but to remain aligned. Peace matures where the soul keeps turning toward God without drama, without delay, without self-judgment. Mature peace also carries gentleness toward others. A soul no longer disturbed by its own imperfections becomes less disturbed by the imperfections of others. Thérèse noticed that impatience toward oneself often leads to impatience toward others. But when the heart rests in mercy, it naturally extends mercy. This peace is quiet. It does not need to prove itself. It does not need constant reassurance. It simply remains even when prayer feels dry, even when emotions fluctuate, even when small faults persist. Thérèse teaches that such peace is one of the greatest signs of spiritual growth, not because faults disappear, but because love becomes more stable than fear. To live this peace, the soul must stop measuring itself constantly. Measurement breeds tension. Comparison breeds unrest. But trust breeds rest. So if you notice small faults still present in your life, do not be discouraged. Ask instead, am I quicker to return? Am I gentler with myself? Am I trusting more deeply? If the answer is yes, peace is maturing. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux ultimately teaches that peace is not something the soul can manufacture, protect, or preserve by its own effort. Peace is a gift, delicate, living, and freely given by God to the heart that consents to receive it. Small faults wound peace when the soul tries to guard itself. Peace returns and matures when the soul allows God to guard it instead. Thérèse wrote, "I let myself be carried like a little child." This single sentence contains the conclusion of the little way. When the soul stops carrying itself, peace finds a home. In the beginning, small faults disturb peace because the heart reacts with tension, either through carelessness or through excessive self-control. But as the soul grows in trust, these same faults lose their power. They no longer provoke fear. They no longer disrupt belonging. They become moments of return rather than sources of unrest. Imagine a child walking through a busy street, holding tightly to a parent's hand. The noise, movement, and confusion remain, but the child is calm. Not because the street is peaceful, but because the child is held. Thérèse believed this image captures the soul's final state of peace. Life does not become free of difficulty. Imperfections do not disappear. Small faults still arise. But the heart remains calm because it knows where it belongs. This is the peace Thérèse lived and taught. A peace grounded not in self-mastery, but in surrender. A peace that does not collapse under weakness. A peace that survives dryness, struggle, and imperfection. She insisted that God is more attentive to love than to faults. The soul that loves sincerely, even imperfectly, is always at peace with God, because love covers what weakness exposes. Small faults wound peace only when they pull the heart inward. Peace is restored when the heart turns outward, toward God's tenderness. This is why Thérèse encouraged souls to remain simple until the end. Complexity disturbs peace, simplicity preserves it. When the soul stops analyzing, measuring, and fearing, and instead rests, peace becomes stable. In this final movement, peace no longer depends on vigilance. It flows naturally from belonging. The soul no longer asks, "Am I at peace?" It simply lives, held, loved, and secure. This is the quiet holiness Thérèse offers to every soul. Not the holiness of perfection, but the holiness of trust. Not the peace of control, but the peace of surrender. Not the absence of faults, but the absence of fear. And so, if your peace has been wounded by small faults, do not despair. Do not fight. Do not withdraw, simply return again and again with a child's heart. God's tenderness has never left you. Peace has only been waiting for you to rest. This is the little way.